Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a very special guest with us, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Ambassador Wadhwa has been with the Indian government in the foreign services for a long time. He's retired, but he still is very active in the space between Australia and India. What I'd like to do is ask Ambassador Wadhwa just to give a little bit of a background of himself and where you are currently, please.
So I've been working with the Indian Foreign Service since 1979, and I finished in 2017. And I've been ambassador to a few countries, starting from Poland, Oman, Thailand, and Italy. As Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, I was looking after relationship with Australia for a couple of years. I was here with the Prime Ministerial visit, which happened in 2015, when Prime Minister Modi was here. And we had a return visit by Prime Minister Abbott soon thereafter. In my own capacity, I have also visited Australia on a few occasions to carry out some dialogues. And it's always been very fascinating to get back to Australia. Currently, I'm in Delhi working with Vivekananda International Foundation, which is a think tank where we give policy advice to governments and others on what India should be doing in various fields. I'm also associated with business and again working with a few consultancies, and at the same time working with CII now for chairing a group on writing an economic strategy with Australia, between India and Australia, which will be coming out after a few months.
Wonderful. Let's cover some of those things. I have got fond memories of you. I was National Chairman of the Australia-India Business Council in 2014 when we met. I think we met a year before, but coming here with the Prime Minister Modi, we worked very closely together. We sat on the floor of Parliament with the historic speech by the Prime Minister in Canberra.
I remember that, yes.
We had we organised a full business event for the Prime Minister at the Governor's residence, 550 people. We had the CEO roundtable. So from your perspective, from your eyes, talk a little bit about your experience with Australia from that perspective, having come here, being Secretary East, managing the Australia relationship, and then bringing the Prime Minister and then showing him Australia as well. How did it look from your eyes, from the Indian business side or the Indian government side?
Well, it's like this. If you look at the relationship with Australia, it's always been an important relationship, but very benign always. And the reasons for this are very difficult to explain. Even though the two economies are very complementary, we have a lot of companies from India in Australia and vice versa. But somehow the investment side, which it should, has not taken off as much as it should have in the normal course. And trade is also hovered between 15 to 20 billion Australian dollars. We should be doing much more. So I think over the last few years, there's been a focus on this relationship by both sides. I think the visit by Prime Minister Modi here was the turning point in terms of focusing on Australia as far as India is concerned, and also vice versa. We've come very close as two countries on strategic and political issues in recent years. As you know, we work very closely in the East Asia Summit and in the Indo-Pacific on various issues. We are part of the Quad, which has been revived recently. And our thinking is alike on issues related to geostrategic problems of the region. We also cooperate a lot in terms of things like disaster management and healthcare as far as the region is concerned. Right. And this list is growing. It's growing. The convergences are growing, and in terms of defense and security also we've come a long way since then. So I see a good future for the relationship in the coming years.
Absolutely. And as that, we feel in Australia that Australia definitely has to work harder in this relationship, particularly in the trade and investment space, as opposed to anything else. India being an emerging country, growing so fast, and having almost every nation in the world wanting to do something with India or other. It's very hard to put attention on one or the other. You've got your priority countries. Where would India put Australia if you were to rank it, top 20, top 15?
Well, I think Australia certainly is in the top 15, 20 countries because of the complementarities, as I said, of the economies. In terms of resources, Australia is very important for India. But what is equally important is that Australia puts together some long-term supply strategies for India. So that means assurances of supply and in terms of coal and iron ore, uranium now.
Yes.
And all these are going to be required in the future development of the Indian economy.
Sure.
But equally, I think there is time now, time has come for Australian businesses to look at India again from investments in mining in India, because there was a time when this sector was not so open and a little bit opaque, but at the moment with reforms coming in, the sector has opened up quite a bit for foreign investment, and it's become easier. So this would ensure that the relationship in this sector becomes mutually dependent rather than just a buyer-seller relationship. Equally, I think there is a lot of scope in 10 or 12 other sectors, mainly in infrastructure space, because if you look at India today, the main problems are skilling for our youth, which is population which is growing, and also urbanization. So the attendant issues which come up with urbanization, modernization of infrastructure, etc., and making sure that the economy is developing well in all the sectors. So that balance in the economy has to be maintained, which requires a lot of funding from the, not from the public sector, but from the private sector. So you have pension funds, for example, in Australia, we should look at India as an investment destination, a long-term investment destination. Returns have been very good, and there are others from other pension funds, for example, from other countries who have come into India and quite satisfied with the results so far. In the foreseeable future, the economy is going to grow because of the fact that it's now opening up much more. Reforms are going to continue. And today, India is amongst the large economies, one of the fastest growing. Last quarter, there was an 8.2% growth, for instance. And actually, India needs to maintain that kind of growth in order to sustain this growth in our population, and also to make sure that the people who are below the poverty line are lifted above. A lot has been done, but a lot more is to follow.
Needs to follow, yeah. Look, obviously, we all feel it's a very exciting opportunity. What we need to do is translate that excitement and those feelings to the corporate boardrooms of Australia. And I think we've discussed this before, where the age of the people in the corporate boardrooms of Australia is at an age where they've actually possibly had some experience with India in the past, and that memory still stays there with them. And so we need to try to alleviate that and show them that India's changed, the ease of doing business, policy changes. It's easier to do that. What can India do to assist us in doing that? I mean, I guess it's more of a leading question, because last year, the year before last, I think, the finance minister, Mr. Jaitley, came, and he came with a delegation. And I was in Melbourne, where we had all of the super funds there, and there was an elephant in the room. And that elephant was the retrospective tax. The answer Mr. Jaitley gave was, that's our sovereign right. It's true, it's a fact, it's every country's sovereign right. But how do we alleviate and protect, how do we handhold, how does the Indian government handhold Australian companies, particularly the super funds, institutional investors, to give them some comfort behind coming in?
Well, 2 or 3 things have happened since then. which are very important. One is that there is a national infrastructure fund which has been set up in India, and a national investment fund which is investing mainly into infrastructure. And that chooses the projects for other investors. So one can reasonably be sure that the returns are going to be there. It's a safe kind route of investment if a fund doesn't want to go through in an individual choosing of projects, etc. Secondly, there is a project grid which is now available on the web, and you can actually look at all the projects which are going on at any point in time in India, which was not the case earlier.
Right.
So you would know where to begin and where to end. But right now you can pick and choose, and after you pick and choose a project, you can actually go down to a partner in India and say, let's get into this project together because I'm interested in it. Third is the ease of doing business, which you mentioned yourself. India has jumped many points since then, and that has happened because there is natural competition now amongst the states in India to do better. So the reforms have percolated down. They still have to complete the whole course, but things are much better than they were, let's say, 2 years ago.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a constant attempt to simplify procedures. There is now a body called Invest India, which handholds, tells investors that we will find you partners if you give us the profile. And also the states themselves have set up cells to promote investment. So they actually welcome you and also point you in a direction which they feel is the right direction for a potential investor. So it's not as if India has changed completely, but at the same time, the businesses which go in now find it much easier to do business. And you're absolutely right that somebody who's had a bad experience in the past, let's say about 15 years ago, would think things are the same, but they're not any longer.
And that's where I think a bit more of an understanding with what's happening in Australia. The largest migrants coming in today are from Indians. And so there's a growth that's happening, a bigger bridge that's been built, that people-to-people connectivity. And I think that they will eventually get to the point where, infiltrate the culture and understanding. So it takes time. But when we're in events like this, there are companies in Australia that say, well, we want to do it this way, we want to do it that way. And it is difficult to explain to them unless they're actually on the ground floor. And this is the way, having these kind of events, having delegations like the one you're on today, assists heavily because you're eyeballing the people who are on the ground. And the next step is to take them into India and handhold them. I think that the whole gamut of projects and activities that the government is conducting right now is phenomenal. You can see that in the advent of the increase in foreign direct investments, the want of countries and companies from around the world wanting to come into India, the GDP growth, etc., etc. How long do you think that growth will continue, and how much longer has India got before it becomes a developed nation where it plays in a different field?
Excuse me. Well, I think for the foreseeable future, I see no hurdles in the growth in India because the fundamentals of the economy are very good. The direction of reform is the correct direction. And I think the country is geared because of the aspirations of the people to do well economically. Government policies are now attuned to that ambition, which probably was not the case earlier. And because of the ambition of the people and because it's now driven by demand in the economy, various sectors will continue to grow in India. And unless the world takes an economic downtrend, India will continue to attract foreign investment as before, as has happened over the last few years. And I see that there is a trend now to ensure that between the states themselves, that they grow better than before, so that they can deliver to the people. Development has become a big part of the election agenda, which is it was not necessarily the case before. So I have no doubts that this will continue. The growth will continue for the foreseeable future. Of course, India will take a long time to come to a stage where it is a developed country, mainly because of the huge population that India has. And 1.3 billion people today will grow even further. The challenge is to make sure that the youth of the country, because it's a very young population, is channeled properly, and therefore we need skilling of this population so that they become employable. And one of the main reasons why Prime Minister Modi launched the policy of Make in India in 2014 was because he wanted to provide jobs to people who would find it in the manufacturing sector. Therefore, the aim is to raise the share of manufacturing in GDP from 15% to about 25%.
Right.
And that is why you see an opening of various sectors, reform in various sectors, and FDI being welcomed in most of the sectors, and gradually opening up the economy into more and more sectors. So you will see this trend continue in the future.
Just talking about, earlier we spoke about the Australia-India relationship, and in that, Australia is really taking a proactive role to get closer to India. And recently the government of Australia engaged Peter Varghese to write the India Economic Strategy 2035. It was released some couple of months ago. 514 pages. I'm sure you've read it. I certainly haven't. I've read bits and pieces of it, the executive summary. It's a very succinct report. In my view, it's a wonderfully written report, and it covers 10 states and 10 industry sectors with case studies and examples and so on. It's good to have that report. One thing I think could be done now, moving forward from that, is the execution. So here's the sectors, here's the states. How do you actually do it? Who's going to take the Australian companies into that? That's one thing. Secondly, congratulations on being appointed the chair for the reciprocate report from India. So I'm assuming this is commissioned by the government, allocated to CII, and CII have picked you to be the chairman of that. And an apt person to speak, because you've got on the ground experience with Australia. You know most of the senior people and the stakeholders in Australia and India. Having read that report, the India Economic Strategy from Australia, what do you expect? And I won't hold you to this, but what do you expect would be India's response to that report?
Actually, the Indian response has already been very positive.
Right.
The report has been released in various places, and your High Commissioner has been very active in promoting this report in India, which is very good. And wherever the release has taken place, and those who read it actually found it extremely useful and a very nice compilation of with the focus on the sectors and the states, as you said. The only thing is that in India, as I said this morning in a panel, is a very dynamic kind of country where things keep changing very fast. So what is focus today may not be the focus tomorrow.
That's right.
And that holds true for the case of states as well. So there, because there is so much of flux in terms of policies and a lot of states competing together, a point which I made earlier, you'll find suddenly that Australian interests could lie in some other states which are not listed in the report. But this is a very good beginning,
yes,
because it's been compiled from the perspective of where Australia has an interest at the moment. So, this is pointing to a direction. Now it's up to the Australian government really to encourage this through various means, through businesses, through chambers of commerce, through the mission and the consulates and the trade delegations which visit India, because they have a focus already. They don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
They know where to go and what to do. And even the sectors have been laid down with examples so they can speak to the others who had that experience before. So this is a very good start.
Yeah.
We hope to do something similar from the Indian perspective for the Australian market, and trade and investments in Australia. I'm sure it's going to be a daunting task, but I think we will do it. And once you then put the two together, I suppose it will give you a comprehensive picture about where we go as two countries in the future.
Do you have a time frame, or?
We don't have a time frame, but we hope to finish this as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ambassador Wadhwa, thank you so much for spending some time with me. We say in Australia, this is gold, which means it's incredible knowledge and information. So thank you so much for sharing your gold with us.
Thank you. Thank you.